welcome to Boring History, where we travel back a million years ago to witness the dawn of human survival and adaptation. This is the story of how our earliest ancestors battled the wild, discovered tools, and laid the foundation for everything we know today. In the vast expanse of prehistoric Earth, a million years ago, the ancestors of humanity faced an environment both harsh and unforgiving, one where every day was a gamble between life and death. The first sparks of survival instincts did not arise suddenly or by chance. They were carved into the very fabric of early human experience through countless trials, moments of danger, and flashes of primitive awareness. These instincts were not the product of reflection or deliberate planning, but rather a raw, immediate response to an unpredictable world. In the shifting landscapes of savannas, forests, and rocky shelters, early hominins found themselves surrounded by predators larger and stronger than they were, from saber-toothed cats lurking in the tall grasses to packs of hyenas waiting for the slightest sign of weakness. The instinct to run, to hide, to stand together, to listen to the faint rustle of leaves or the snapping of twigs became the first line of defense, a system of alertness that was not taught, but ingrained through repeated confrontation with danger. The human mind, still in its primitive stages, began registering patterns. The cry of certain birds signaling the approach of a predator, the direction of wind carrying the scent of danger, the sudden silence of insects foretelling an ambush. In those fleeting recognitions, survival was no longer merely luck, but the earliest manifestation of awareness, a spark of instinct that would grow into the cornerstone of human resilience. The first sparks of survival instincts also revealed themselves in the pursuit of food. Hunger was the constant companion of early humans, gnawing at their bellies, pushing them toward rivers, valleys, and plains in search of anything edible. At first, scavenging carcasses left behind by larger predators offered the only opportunity to taste meat, but this required both courage and calculation. To approach a lion's leftovers meant knowing when to risk the proximity of danger and when to retreat. That moment of hesitation, that decision to dart in quickly and grab a marrow, rich bone before being noticed, was guided not by reasoned strategy but by an instinctive drive honed over countless encounters. Over time, this repeated necessity sharpened senses and reflexes, training early humans to read the environment with increasing accuracy. The recognition of edible roots, the bitter aftertaste of poisonous plants, the memory of which fruits cause sickness, all filtered into a growing catalogue of survival knowledge. Each successful choice, each avoidance of danger, deepened those instincts further, embedding them into behaviors that could be imitated and shared within small groups. Fire, though not yet mastered at this stage, played its role in stimulating survival instincts. Lightning strikes would ignite the dry grasslands, and the strange, terrifying force of flames both repelled and fascinated early humans. Their instinct told them to flee the destructive path of fire, yet at the same time, the warmth left behind, the cooked remains of animals, and the light that pushed away predators planted seeds of attraction. To hover at the edge of destruction and cautiously edge closer revealed the dual nature of instinct, fear balanced with curiosity. It was this tension that allowed early humans to endure and eventually to adapt, for survival was never about brute strength, but about the capacity to respond, to sense danger and opportunity in equal measure. Shelter, too, arose as a response to instinctive needs. As rains poured, winds howled, and temperatures dropped, early humans searched for caves, overhangs, or dense thickets that offered a degree of protection. The choice of where to rest, where to hide the young, was guided by a sensitivity to the environment. Avoid the cave where predator tracks are visible. Avoid the waterlogged ground that attracts insects. Stay near but not too close to the river where crocodiles lurk. These were not reasoned calculations in the way modern humans think, but a primal recognition of safety and danger. Each mistake carried the risk of death, while each successful choice imprinted survival lessons that shaped instinct further. The role of sound and alertness cannot be underestimated in these early sparks. In the silence of the night, when the darkness swallowed vision and left humans vulnerable, hearing became their shield. The soft pad of paws against the earth, the snapping of twigs beneath a heavy body, the distant howl echoing through valleys, all of these sounds etched themselves into instinctive reactions. To startle awake, to hush children, to remain frozen in stillness until danger passed. These responses became the difference between survival and annihilation. Over generations, such constant exposure heightened sensitivity, embedding hyperawareness into the human nervous system. Even today, remnants of these ancient instincts linger in the way humans react to sudden noises or to being watched. Shadows of the survival code written deep in prehistory. The first sparks of survival instincts were not only defensive but also social. No early human survived alone. Instinct drew individuals into groups, bound not by language but by mutual dependence. The cry of a child summoned protection. The sight of a wounded member stirred a collective response. For the survival of one affected the survival of all. Within these bonds, instincts of cooperation were born. To circle around a threat, to gather around the weak, to share a found carcass or a patch of edible plants. These were not yet moral choices but raw necessities. The instinct to stay together, to seek safety in numbers, became as critical as the instinct to flee. Over time, this drive for connection would evolve into the roots of social behavior, but at its dawn it was merely survival expressed through unity. Movement itself became instinctive strategy. Migration across landscapes, guided by the changing seasons, was not an organized decision, but an unspoken pull towards safety and sustenance. When water dried in one valley, instinct urged exploration beyond the familiar. The risk of the unknown was balanced by the desperation of hunger, and each successful journey carved routes that generations would follow. To sense the shifting climate, to follow animal herds, to anticipate storms by the smell of the air or the movements of the clouds, all reflected instinctive awareness long before the rise of reasoning. What separated early humans from many other creatures was not raw power, but adaptability, and this adaptability was fed by instinct. The first sparks of tool use came not as invention, but as instinctive imitation. Watching a rock shatter another or noticing the sharp edge of a broken stone led to grasping, testing, and using. The survival instinct to crack a nut or slice flesh was not innovation in the modern sense, but a desperate trial guided by the urgency of need. Slowly, these instincts refined into habits, and habits became traditions. The dangers of illness, wounds, and parasites also pushed instincts into new territory. The bitter taste of certain plants that repelled insects, the cool mud applied to soothe a sting, the recognition that rest aided recovery, all emerged not as planned strategies, but instinctive reactions tested through experience. Survival demanded such responses, and those who listened to these subtle cues endured longer, leaving descendants who carried the same instinctive inclinations forward. Over countless generations, instinct evolved from individual reactions into a collective wisdom embedded in groups. The memory of where to find water in drought, the cautionary avoidance of certain caves, the seasonal knowledge of when fruits ripened, all were preserved through imitation and repetition rather than spoken teaching. Instinct was the silent teacher, guiding actions before thought, ensuring that even the inexperienced young absorbed survival behaviors simply by being immersed in the environment of their elders. The first sparks of survival instincts were never static. They shifted with changing landscapes, with the migration of prey, with the arrival of predators never seen before. The ability to sense change and adapt quickly defined humanity's earliest path. A storm could strip a valley bare, a wildfire could alter an entire ecosystem, but those who responded instinctively, who moved, who hid, who seized new opportunities, were the ones who carried the lineage forward. This constant cycle of challenge and adaptation forged instincts into something sharper, deeper, and more enduring than any single generation could comprehend. When the earliest humans first looked upon the world around them, they did not see the abstract notion of tools as we understand them today, but they felt the raw urgency of survival pressing upon their every movement. Clenched fists were no match for the tusks of a mammoth or the fangs of a predator, and bare skin offered little protection against the searing sun or the bitter cold. Out of this desperate imbalance emerged the first instinctive grasp of objects beyond the body, an extension of flesh and bone into stone, wood, and bone itself. The earliest tools were not crafted with intention, but stumbled upon by chance, yet those chances marked the beginnings of human adaptation. A jagged shard of rock, picked up in frustration or curiosity, could cut through the sinew of an animal carcass, revealing marrow rich with energy. A sturdy branch, stripped of leaves, could be wielded against a threatening beast or used to pry at the earth in search of edible roots. These primitive gestures were not inventions in the modern sense, but responses to necessity, and necessity drove repetition until the behavior became imprinted within the rhythms of survival. Adaptations quickly intertwined with these early tools. Each environment shaped what could be grasped, sharpened, or carried. In regions where stones littered the ground, flakes became blades, while in dense forests, branches and vines became spears and bindings. The form of tools was dictated by availability, and the instinct to repurpose the natural world became the foundation of human adaptability. A broken bone of a hunted animal, its sharp edge glinting in the sun, could serve as a scraper or a cutting edge. From such simple beginnings arose a feedback loop of survival. The tool solved an immediate problem. The adaptation made the tool more efficient, and the lessons from its use carried forward to the next encounter. The making of stone tools, though initially accidental, grew into deliberate action. One early human might have struck two stones together in an attempt to split them apart, only to notice the sharp edge that emerged. That sharpness, capable of cutting more cleanly than fingernails or teeth, became invaluable for processing meat, stripping hides, and shaping wood. Over time, the recognition spread not all stones were equal. Certain rocks fractured in predictable ways, producing sharper edges, while others shattered into useless fragments. This recognition represented not mere accident, but adaptation through observation. The minds of early humans began connecting cause and effect, not in words but in actions repeated until they formed patterns. To strike a core stone with a hammerstone and produce flakes was an act of survival born of adaptation. And these simple techniques were passed across generations, each one embedding deeper into the continuity of human existence. The relationship between tools and food cannot be overstated. Before sharp, edged stones, scavenging meant pulling apart carcasses with bare hands and teeth, often leaving behind valuable nutrients inaccessible to unassisted fingers. With a flake of stone, tendons could be cut, hides peeled, bones cracked open. This not only expanded the diet of early humans, but allowed them to compete with other scavengers, arriving late to a kill yet still extracting sustenance where predators had moved on. Adaptation in diet, enabled by tools, reshaped bodies and minds alike. Rich marrow and protein fueled brain development, and as brains expanded, so too did the capacity for more complex adaptation. Tools were not merely implements, but catalysts for transformation. The making of tools extended beyond the hand to the mind's growing ability to imagine possibilities. A branch was no longer just wood to be walked past, but something that could be stripped, sharpened, and thrust as a weapon. Early humans who grasped this adaptation gained an edge in hunting, turning from scavengers into opportunistic hunters themselves. A pointed stick could keep a predator at bay or pierce the hide of a smaller animal. These were not grand innovations, but incremental adaptations, each one building on the last, each one making survival just a little more attainable. Fire, too, became part of this interplay between tools and adaptations, though control of fire would come much later. At first, it was an adaptation of behavior rather than mastery. The instinct to carry a smoldering branch from a natural fire to a shelter, to use it for warmth, or to ward off predators, hinted at the recognition that natural elements could be bent to human need. The use of fire to harden wooden spear tips, discovered perhaps when branches left near flames emerged more rigid, was one of the earliest moments when humans not only reacted to the environment, but shaped it through adaptation. Clothing arose in a similar manner. Exposed skin left humans vulnerable to cold, wind, and rain, and instinct alone could not protect them. The hides of animals, stripped with stone tools, became coverings, crude at first, little more than draped skins tied with sinew or fiber. This adaptation extended the range of human survival into harsher climates, enabling groups to push beyond warm savannas into colder forests and grasslands. The act of wearing skins was not fashion but necessity, and yet it marked a profound shift. The body no longer had to endure the environment unassisted, but could be shielded by tools fashioned from other creatures. As tools became more refined, so too did the adaptations of group behavior. Cooperation was essential in hunting, and weapons encouraged new strategies. A single sharpened stick had limited power, but a group armed with them could drive prey into traps or toward ambushes. The creation of tools changed not only the relationship between humans and nature, but also between humans and one another, sharing the results of tool use. Meat cut with flakes, hides scraped clean, marrow cracked from bones, strengthened communal bonds. Adaptation was no longer individual but collective, woven into the fabric of group survival. The evolution of tools extended to the shaping of landscapes. Simple digging sticks allowed roots to be harvested more efficiently, while stones arranged as pounding surfaces crushed seeds or nuts into digestible forms. The human hand, guided by instinct and honed by practice, was reshaping the environment. Each adaptation created new possibilities. The stone that cracked open nuts today could be used tomorrow to shape another stone into a sharper edge. The branch stripped for a spear could inspire the next generation to experiment with multiple sharpened ends or weighted tips. Tools also altered the rhythm of daily life. Before their use, much of survival was reactive, a scramble to seize opportunities before they disappeared. With tools, early humans gained a measure of control. Meat could be stripped and carried more efficiently, hides processed for later use, wood shaped for future needs. This storage of potential, whether in prepared resources or sharpened implements, marked a fundamental adaptation. The future could be prepared for, even if only in small ways. The uncertainty of survival was still immense, but tools provided a buffer against its sharpest edges. Adaptations extended to the body as well. Over generations, the repeated use of tools changed muscles, postures, and even the precision of the grip. The thumb, already opposable, became more dexterous as it was used to grasp and manipulate objects. The coordination between eye and hand grew sharper, tuned by the demands of striking flakes or aiming spears. These physical adaptations were inseparable from the cultural ones, each reinforcing the other, each pushing humanity further from its animal ancestors into a realm uniquely its own. The learning of tool use spread not through words, but through imitation. Young ones watched the movements of elders, absorbing the sequences of strikes, the choices of stones, the grip of a hand. This transfer of knowledge was itself an adaptation, a way of ensuring continuity beyond individual lifespans. In this way, tools became more than objects. They became traditions, carriers of memory, and survival across time. The instinct to observe and replicate laid the foundation for culture long before culture was recognized as such. Adaptations of thought followed in the wake of tools. To shape a stone into a cutting edge required foresight, the recognition that effort spent now would yield benefit later. This delay of gratification, this planning beyond the immediate moment, was a profound adaptation. It allowed humans to begin thinking ahead, to anticipate future needs, to invest energy in preparation rather than mere reaction. Each stone flake struck, each spear sharpened, was a silent rehearsal for the concept of planning, a seed of the complex cognition that would one day define humanity. The diversity of environments forced diversity in adaptations. In river valleys, tools were shaped for fishing and processing aquatic plants. In open grasslands, weapons for hunting and defense were prioritized. In forests, climbing tools, digging implements, and cutting edges became essential. This flexibility, the ability to adapt tools to circumstances, distinguished early humans from other creatures. Where claws and teeth were fixed, human tools could be reinvented, reshaped, and reimagined endlessly. Adaptability became the greatest tool of all, born from the willingness to experiment, to observe, and to change. Even failures contributed to adaptation. A stone that shattered wrong, a spear that broke mid-hunt, a shelter that collapsed under storm. Each failure became a lesson etched into instinct. The resilience to try again, to adjust technique, to learn from misfortune, was itself an adaptation, one that carried humanity through countless setbacks. Every mistake sharpened the next attempt, and every success reinforced the behavior. This cycle of trial and error was slow, grinding forward over generations, but it ensured progress where other species remained bound by instinct alone. In these ways, the early tools and adaptations of humanity were not separate innovations but threads of a single tapestry. Each stone flake struck, each branch sharpened, each hide worn was a small act of defiance against the limits of the natural world. Adaptation was the bridge between weakness and survival, between the fragility of flesh and the vast, indifferent environment. The story of early tools is the story of humans refusing to remain bound by their own biology, reaching outward into the world around them and discovering, piece by piece, that the environment itself could be bent to their will. When the earliest humans gathered together beneath the open skies, or within the shelter of caves, they were not yet bound by language or complex traditions. But something deeper than words drew them close. The foundations of human communities were laid not in speeches or rules but in instinct, in the recognition that togetherness offered a greater chance of survival than isolation ever could. The cry of an infant, vulnerable and helpless, was not just the burden of one mother, but a sound that stirred an entire group into protective alertness. The success of a hunt was not the triumph of a single hand, but the shared nourishment of all, from the strongest hunters to the weakest elders. It was in these small acts of reliance, repeated day after day, that the first outlines of community were sketched into the human story. The fire, glowing at the heart of a group, became more than warmth and light, it became a gathering place. Around it, food was shared, dangers were discussed in gestures and sounds, and comfort was found in the nearness of others. The glow of fire pushed back the darkness where predators prowled, and within that circle of safety humans learned the quiet strength of belonging. The foundation of community was not built upon abstract laws, but upon the lived reality that survival was easier when hands joined, when eyes watched together, when voices warned in unison. Sharing was the first bond. A carcass stripped with stone flakes provided more meat than one person could consume alone, and waste was dangerous in a world where every calorie mattered. To offer a portion to another was not generosity in the modern sense, but recognition that today's gift ensured tomorrow's return. Reciprocity bound people together, weaving invisible threads of obligation and trust. When one stumbled, another helped. When one found fruit, others tasted it too. These acts accumulated over time, becoming the unspoken rules of the earliest societies. Roles began to emerge within these gatherings. Not all could hunt or fight, but each found a place that strengthened the whole. The young learned by watching, the old passed on memory through gestures and demonstrations. Women and men shared tasks that shifted with circumstances. Some were better at tracking animals, others at gathering plants, others at shaping tools. This division of labor was not formalized but flowed naturally, born from observation of strengths and weaknesses. Adaptability allowed groups to use every skill available, and the foundations of community deepened with each recognition that cooperation brought abundance where solitude brought scarcity. Conflict inevitably arose, yet even this contributed to the shaping of community. Disagreements over food, mating, or territory tested the fragile bonds, but through such conflicts early humans began to develop ways of resolving disputes. A display of dominance, a show of strength, or a gesture of submission restored balance without destroying the group. Over time, these interactions shaped early hierarchies, informal structures where certain individuals carried more influence, not through imposed authority but through experience, strength, or the ability to lead others through danger. Leadership, in its earliest form, was born from necessity, and followers chose to align with those who ensured survival. Communication, though not yet language as we know it, evolved within the heart of communities. Sounds, gestures, and facial expressions conveyed warnings, instructions, and emotions. A raised hand could signal caution, a call could summon attention, a glance could direct movement. These primitive forms of communication allowed coordination in hunting, gathering, and defense, and as groups relied more on one another, their capacity for shared meaning expanded. The pressure of communal living gave rise to the beginnings of symbolic thought, for survival depended not only on individual reactions, but on collective action shaped by shared understanding. The care of the vulnerable became a defining mark of human communities. Unlike many animals, human infants required years of dependency before they could contribute to survival. To raise a child was not the task of one parent alone, but of an entire group. Older children carried younger ones, elders guided parents, and the collective invested time and resources into each fragile new life. This communal investment was an adaptation that ensured continuity, for without it the species would have faltered. Elders, though no longer able to hunt, carried the weight of memory, guiding groups toward familiar waterholes, safe shelters, or seasonal food sources. Their survival ensured the survival of knowledge, and in this way the community itself became a living memory, larger than any single life. Rituals began to stir within these gatherings, though not yet named as such. The shared experience of grief when a member was lost, the shared relief when danger passed, the shared awe at fire or storms. All these moments gave rise to collective expressions. A group might gather around the body of a fallen member, touching, wailing, or sitting in silence. Another group might raise hands or voices in unison after a successful hunt, celebrating survival. These rituals were the beginnings of culture, shaping emotional bonds into patterns that outlasted individual moments. The landscape also shaped communities. Groups that lived near rivers developed adaptations around fishing and water gathering, while those in forests relied on fruit and smaller prey. In open plains, hunting and mobility dominated. Each environment required not only individual skills but group strategies, and this constant negotiation with nature forged stronger bonds. The need to move together, to decide collectively when to leave a camp, or where to seek food, forced consensus and compromise. Communities were forged in these decisions, for the survival of all depended on the willingness to follow shared paths. Safety was perhaps the strongest glue binding early humans. Alone, a person was vulnerable to predators, starvation, or injury. Within a group, the chances of survival multiplied. Watchers at night took turns staying awake, allowing others to rest. Hunters coordinated to corner prey. Gatherers shared the burden of carrying food. Injured members were supported until they recovered. The constant presence of danger made community not optional, but essential, and this necessity shaped instincts into habits and habits into enduring social structures. Emotions, too, played their role. Affection between parents and children, bonds between mates, loyalty between companions, all created ties that stretched beyond mere survival. These emotional connections reinforced cooperation, turning community from a practical arrangement into something deeper. The warmth of touch, the reassurance of presence, the grief of loss. All these feelings gave weight to relationships, ensuring that humans stayed together, not only because they had to but because they wanted to. In this emotional depth lay the earliest roots of empathy, compassion, and belonging. Communities also served as the crucibles of innovation. A single person experimenting with a new way to chip a stone might fail, but within a group, such experiments could be observed, repeated, improved. Knowledge spread more widely and more quickly within communities, turning individual sparks into collective fire. The first shared tools, the first coordinated hunts, the first mutual shelters, these arose because people lived not in isolation, but in groups where ideas could be witnessed and imitated. Community magnified human creativity, allowing each adaptation to ripple outward and strengthen all. As communities grew more complex, movement between groups added further layers of connection. Individuals might leave one band and join another, carrying knowledge, tools, or habits with them. Interactions between groups, whether peaceful exchanges or violent clashes, spread cultural elements across wider regions. The foundations of community extended beyond a single group to networks of groups, each influencing and shaping the other. Through these exchanges, diversity in tools, behaviors, and strategies flourished, embedding adaptability even deeper into the human story. Over time, the act of living together shaped identity. A person was not just a solitary being but part of a group, defined by shared experiences and survival. The markings on a body, the particular ways of making tools, the chosen hunting grounds, all became identifiers of belonging. Communities gave individuals a place within a larger whole, a sense of continuity that stretched beyond a single life. To be part of a group was to be part of something enduring, and this sense of belonging strengthened the will to survive against all odds.